that. Glad to have you guys with us out of Eric's class. Is that right? Yeah, okay. All right, 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter 5. I was recounting to my wife this morning that, boy, when I get done with this chapter, we'll only have 5 books left, and they're short ones until Revelation. And she said, aha, then you're going to really have to study. I have been. That's all right. I'm looking forward to Revelation. But for now, 1 Peter chapter 5, we start out with therefore. And you know I always like to recount why that is there so we know what we're talking about. So if I went back a verse, it starts with therefore. So that's no help. Okay, 2 steps back this morning and 1 ahead. Well, actually what Peter has been doing is recounting the fact of suffering, and that it isn't just suffering because God wants us to feel bad. That's not it at all. Suffering has a point. Suffering has a profit to it. It's well, even James, he says, you know, rejoice when you suffer, and so on. So suffering, we must not look at it as if we're suffering, like Job's comforters said to Job, well, you must have been really, 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 really bad. You must be just the dregs of the earth to be treated like you've been treated. And Job countered with, you windbags. So suffering does have a point. And even back in this time, in Job's time, rather, Job was being used of God to make a point. And that occurred. But for here now, 1 Peter chapter 5, therefore I exhort the elders among you, as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker of the glory that is to be revealed, and so on. He goes on, it's a longer sentence. But for now, he says, I've seen the suffering. I know about suffering. I know about Christ's suffering. I witnessed it. And an eyewitness is generally considered of much more value in trying to discern or ascertain what occurred. An eyewitness. What happened? Well, we've got a fellow who saw it. And fine, and then you can probably get pretty much what happened. Now, if you have 2 eyewitnesses, well, that cuts the value of it in half because you may have 2 different stories. But an eyewitness, and Peter was one. I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the suffering of Christ. The Garden of Eden. No. The Garden of Gethsemane. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter and the other apostles were there. Peter was one who not only witnessed the sufferings of Christ there, he wanted to defend Christ. He wanted to make it so that Christ wasn't going to be taken. No, sir, not if he could help it. And he drug out his sword. And after he cut off Malchus's ear, Christ fixed it and said, put your sword back. But Peter was there, and he witnessed that. And then shortly after that, he was in the palace of the priest, where Christ was being put on trial. And though you get the account, and Peter, though he's denying Christ 3 times, still the end result as you see the thing play out, Peter felt so terribly bad. So I'm saying that he had to be painfully aware of Christ's suffering, though he wasn't right at Christ's side to see it. He was aware of it. He knew what those Jews were capable of, the Jewish leaders. He knew what the Romans were capable of. And he knew what Christ had told him was going to happen. And so Peter was a witness there of the suffering of Christ. And there on the cross, who actually viewed Christ on the cross? I looked at that, and there's a couple of verses. I'll just mention them. We'll not. There's Acts 3:15, Luke 23:49, and Acts 1:8. Those were verses that if you look at them, we have some people that stood. They weren't at the foot of the cross. Those were the ladies that were. They were brave, and they were close to Christ, and they didn't feel the danger of being crucified themselves so much as men would have felt that were followers of Christ. So they stood a little further back, but I think Peter was one of those, and he viewed this, and he knew what was going on, and he could feel with Christ the suffering. I don't know if he heard the utterances of Christ on the cross. That's a little harder to determine. Anyway, the fact. Peter was an elder. He was an elder in the church. He says, I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder. So that would have made it something for them to cause them to listen to what he had to say. I'm going to exhort you about something, and here are my credentials for you to listen. And it's interesting, he tells them, I am an elder, and I'm a witness. He doesn't say, and I don't, if any of you know of a place where any of the apostles, I'll say, pulled rank and said, I'm an apostle, listen to me. Why is this true? Because I'm an apostle and I said so. I don't recall a place like that, or even a hint that way. And Peter doesn't do it here. Could he have? He could have. But if he did, then there's a verse or so here that he would have to have left out. When he said about lording it over others. He never did that. The apostles, I don't have any account of that. Did Paul do that? No, Paul was a very humble man. A very knowledgeable man, a very well versed and well used man. And you absolutely couldn't doubt. You couldn't doubt any of these men who were apostles with their sincerity and their truthfulness and their knowledgeability of all that they did, and the fact that they were willing to back up everything they said with their very lives, and all but one did. So these were pretty special guys. Luke?
The only thing I can remember Paul saying is, I speak this by the grace given to me, or he'd call it authority of God when he would say, this isn't just what I think, or this isn't just my opinion, but this is what God has revealed to me. You would do that. That's it. That's how they won't rank.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And anytime you could, anytime a person could say, well, you know, God's backing me on this, it makes it rock solid. Okay, all right, thank you. So, I exhort the elders among you. He's talking about the office of the eldership. Could be called a bishop, an overseer, a shepherd, a presbyter. They're used interchangeably in the New Testament. And he just uses the word elder here as an office in the Lord's church. So I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that's to be revealed. So the sufferings and the sufferings that he's mentioned within the last few verses in the book, not all of them had to pertain to Christ. They pertain some to the Christian people likewise. So everybody was familiar with suffering. So he puts in a bit of encouragement, but also the glories. Let me mention the glories that are to follow. If you want to know about the glories that were to follow, read Revelation chapter 22 and the first, or read the whole thing, but the first 5 verses, 6 verses will really tell you, boy, you know, heaven's a pretty nice place. It's got, how many of you like a nice stream? I don't mean a raging river, a nice stream. That's a huge creek or a little river. Okay? All right. Right down the middle of Main Street, we've got this river of life. Boy, that's pretty nice already. And Main Street, by the way, isn't some little out of the way place. It's got nice trees along either bank, and these are the trees of life too. And they bear fruit apparently every month. And you can have that fruit and you live forever. Keep living forever. And now see, that's just the quick view of the glories, the glory that is to be revealed, not to mention God himself to us and Jesus and so on. Okay, so here we have it, an elder talking to those that were fellow elders and people who witnessed and a partaker of the glory to be revealed. He tells these elders, shepherd the flock. The flock of God among you, those that you have charge over. Exercise oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness. So, he doesn't give the qualifications of elders here, but he gives them they could hardly be called marching orders because they're privileges. And all done right, everybody benefits. Everybody. The flock, oh yeah, a good shepherd is absolutely invaluable to the flock. A bad shepherd can wreak havoc, getting them into things that they can't handle, can't deal with. And sheep are, as we've mentioned before, sheep are stupid. What can I say? How many of you been around sheep, herds of sheep? Okay, so you understand. I mean, they can be, you know, Lord, couldn't you put a little more brains in these critters, you know? Dan, you had your hand up.
Peter, I think he's like a lot of us guys. It took some pretty hard knocks for him, but he did much better later. As we're now reading about him, but I don't know. We've all been somewhere where somebody's had to be escorted out, whether it be a courtroom, you may have been in a movie theater. You know, if you run your cell phone or if you talk in a movie theater, but very sober situations, there's a time not to talk. And one of the things I did say to Peter, around a charcoal fire, the way that you speak gives you away.
Yeah.
Maybe he shouldn't have been talking at all, and just very quiet and sober, and so he had to pay for it.
Well, yeah. Yeah, Peter, you're saying Peter had sometimes learned the hard way, but he had learned, and now he could say, shepherd the flock and exercise oversight, and how to do this. You're not doing it because you have to. You're doing it voluntarily. There's a whole big difference. Voluntarily, according to the will of God. So you have guidelines, God's will, and voluntarily, and not because it's going to make you rich. No. Not for money. And conversely, with eagerness, eagerly, voluntarily. Yeah. So, shepherd the flock and do it this way, and how good it will be. The qualifications for elders are in 1 Timothy 3 and in Titus 2. We're not even going to go there, but this is elders that have qualified themselves, and to see that they stay qualified. This is how they're to do what they do, and to their benefit, and they'll see the glory that's to be revealed, as will their flock, and how good all of this is. And he goes on, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples of the flock. With a flock of sheep that trust their shepherd and have a certain amount of understanding, the shepherd can lead them and they will follow. That is a whole lot better situation than a shepherd having to sick the dogs on them to keep them going where you want. And for a shepherd who is a poor shepherd, saying that he can make his flock do what he wants without dogs, he's going to learn a hard lesson, because it won't work. You can't keep up with them. One goes this way and one goes that way. What are you going to do? You're going to lose one of them, and that's it. So with dogs, they help you. But the best way is to lead them, as it says here. It says, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but being examples and leading them by example instead of making them. This past week, you've all heard the story of the parents, just because they were parents, and they're, what was it, 12, 13 children? Were they trying to make those kids do what they wanted? Or were they just whacked out crazy? And parenting skills? Oh, wait a minute. No. You don't do what they did. And see, that's an extreme example. It's caught the world's attention, worldwide. Like, people are just like, you can't be serious. They didn't do that. They couldn't have. They did. And they've got their children as witnesses. So that's just a far out thing. Lording it over them in the worst possible way. dictator is one who's acting that way, and it does not work. But instead of that, he says, don't do that, but to those that are under your charge, but be examples. Works so much better. Okay, and then verse 4, and when the chief shepherd appears, the really good guy, the one is kind of like the great physician, and anything good you want to claim to Christ, he's the chief shepherd. When he appears, you'll receive the unfading crown of glory. The unfading crown of glory. He mentions that in verse 1 also. He starts there. And so for the elders, the elder who has worked and done as described by Peter, but boy, look what awaits. Look how good that is, and how wonderful that is. Now, let me put this with it. If a shepherd, this good shepherd, leads and gets to a place where there's these glories, those who have been led will be there too with these glories, to share in them, and how it's a unit. Everybody gets to do the good thing. So it's when the chief shepherd appears, when Christ appears and we're following him, we'll receive the unfading crown of glory. Unfading crown of glory. Unlike crowns of people in this life. Any crown it's only for the time and those who know it. When I moved to Arcata, to the church there was a plaque on the wall, and it had a young lady's name on it. Was Ruthie Farnsworth. Any of you know Ruthie? No. Well, a couple of you might, yeah. Well, we hadn't been there, but maybe a couple of years, and I had a youth group meeting one evening in the building, and I pointed to that thing, and I said, asked him to read it, and they did, yeah. Said, now, how many of you know who Ruthie Farnsworth was? Since it commemorated her, I could say past tense, was. None of them knew. Maybe one girl thought she might. Now, this was just 2 years after I had come. The former preacher of Farnsworth, Doyle Farnsworth, that was his daughter. And she had been killed in a car wreck while he was there. And it wasn't very long ago, before that time. You see, mementos, crowns, and as it's mentioned here, crowns, they don't last in our memory very long. One of the reasons we say that Christ and God, in their wisdom, has given us this Lord's Supper to commemorate, to remember, to reestablish Christ's death, so that we know every Lord's Day, yeah, he died for me. That's my remembrance. That's his crown. And we don't want that crown to ever fade in our realization. So here, when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Now, it's talking about elders, but and I'm trying to apply it, I think, to everyone who follows the chief shepherd. The elders and their flock will get to keep remembering and keep knowing throughout eternity this crown of glory that Christ has there for himself and for us in a different way. Now, we get to verse, is there anything so far that anybody wants to add? Right, we get to verse 5. We change from elder as an office in the church to you younger men, likewise be subject to your elders. Well, yes, to the elders of the church as an office, but here it is talking about older men. Why would he have to do that? Don't younger men just want to do what they're told? What world did you come from? It's not as though they're bad at this. They're trying to learn their way. They're trying to know, well, what do I do here? What do I do there? And I've been brought up to try to make some of my own decisions, so now I'm trying to do this. And sometimes it works, and sometimes, boy, that was a bad idea. And the problem, it seems to me, comes with we are not naturally submissive as a human being. We aren't submissive. We have to learn it. God created man perfectly in the garden, didn't he? Yep. And inserted into that perfection came a serpent. And from that time on, man has not been submissive. That's what he inserted into the mix there. Adam and Eve disobeyed. That's not being submissive. That's not being humble when we think, well, I know what God said, but I know me. Yeah. So there's all of this, and he starts out here, you younger men likewise, be subject to your elders. And then he says the next phrase, and all of you. So it's not just the young fellows. All of us. Clothe yourself with humility. Of course, you go down to the mall and you want to say, well, clothe yourself with something. Humility is good. Okay. Clothe yourself with humility. Now, of course, you get the picture of its. This isn't literal cloth or whatever. It is an attitude. It's a way of life. It's how I approach things. It's my view of myself in all that's around me and those that I have to deal with. It's all of that. So clothe yourself with humility, and here's the direction: toward one another. Can I be humble toward myself? It's kind of an awkward thing, isn't it? To say, yeah, well, it's kind of like saying, well, I know I'm humble. It doesn't fit well. So clothe yourself with humility toward one another. Yes, Bob.
The term stifle yourself comes to mind.
Sometimes that's humility, sometimes that's bringing yourself into line. Depends. What, yeah, but that's a thought. With that idea, Bob, wouldn't it be a lot easier to be humble toward someone else if we would have a humble opinion of ourselves? Sure. Yeah, and that's that idea. Yeah. If I think I'm such a hot shot, then it's going to be hard for me to be humble toward all the rest of you idiots, you know. Isn't that the way we're treated a lot when you go out and you do this, that, or the other thing? you get I recently bought a shed, and I'm going to have to put this shed up, and it comes with a few instructions. I think it's a book, and I don't know. It's got. I got down to step 37, I think, and I realized, man, maybe that old shed could last longer. But we're treated like you just don't know anything, and so we're going to make a law, or we're going to make a rule, or we're going to make a directive, or we're going to send a memo. It's all ways to express we keep trying to help each other who obviously don't know as much as I do about whatever is going on. Whereas if we would understand that people do have a sense of intelligence and a sense of knowing how to do this and that. Granted, some people don't know some things in some areas. I've got one grandson, who had a hard time getting the hood up on a car, let alone, don't touch it, Devin, please don't. Let Grandpa or your brother. He's the mechanic, natural. And so there are people that can do one thing, but now the one grandson, though he's a mechanic, don't let him into the business end of things. He could take a perfectly good going business and slow it down real good. I'm sure of it. But if you put the two together, they had a business, well, one would take care of the books and the other do the work. Hey, it worked fine. Okay. So, oh, sorry, Steve. What?
I'd like to go back to this part of that verse 5. Likewise, the younger, submit yourselves to the elder. It's just a little, maybe I'm getting old because I reminisce a whole bunch. Years ago in the church, a discussion came up that was really heavy duty, and it was straining things. And I was trying to figure out which way to go. And I stopped and looked. Everybody, this is back when I was 20s, everybody that was younger than me felt this way about it, and everybody that was older than me felt that way about it. And I had read this verse, and my dad had taught me that old people usually are wiser. Usually. And so I put my side with the old guys. And it didn't take long to realize, boy, they were right.
Okay.
And this verse just tells you to do that. The younger, listen to the old guys, because they just might have some wisdom behind their ears.
Okay. And to take any rough edges off of that statement, the old guys aren't always right, and the young guys aren't always wrong. Right. So you have to mix that in, but and Steve, the way he's put it, and he's right, generally speaking, you got to at least look at it with the general way it will probably lean. With the age or not. When you, I don't know what's going on this last weekend, but a whole bunch of people all wanted to march and protest. Man, I hope that this country has more going for it than it's our right to protest. Can't we be glad for what's good? Anyway. If you want to see a hotbed of rebellion and stuff that looks like, can't you stop and think? Look in our universities with the young ones in the universities. they are so easily led by people. Boy, if you knew what they believed, you'd kick them out in an instant. And so there you go. Whereas you get older people, they're harder to lead. In that, when you get older, it's harder to make a change. You know what's right, and you want to stay with it naturally. Sometimes you find out, well, there's a better way, and so you can adapt to that. But to radically change, older people are real slow to do that. And that's a good thing. Okay. We aren't going to solve all of society's ills this morning. I understand that, but Rod?
Once again, there's two sides to this spectrum. You were just talking about the worldly side of it. Steve's talking about the spiritual side of it. The Christian should be more concerned about the Christian side of it, the spiritual side of it. Because after all, this world is not our home. And we have to be focused on heaven. But to what Steve was saying, I obviously fully agree. But I think the biggest problem with what he was saying that we have, wherever we find ourselves as men in the Lord's church, the problem is a verse called pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit for a fall. The best way to beat that is to be totally converted to the Lord Jesus Christ and focus on Him first and yourself last.
Okay, you put all that together, talking about younger men, it talks about elders, elderly men, and it has talked about elders. You put all that together, and you get to verse 6. Therefore, oh, I love therefores again. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. All of us. Therefore, no matter what stage of life, no matter where you're coming from or whatever, humble yourself under God's hand and it'll be good. It'll be real good. But you have to do that. If we don't humble ourselves under God's hand, we are in for it. I was going to overlook this, but your interest has been good enough here. It says, these duties of submission to superiors in age or office and subjection to one another, being contrary to the proud nature and selfish interests of men, Peter advises them to be clothed with humility. Let your minds, behavior, clothing,